You don't notice control immediately. The room feels organized, calm, functional. People speak in turns, conversations move without interruption. Nothing appears chaotic, nothing feels loud. At first, it feels like leadership or structure. Then you begin to see the pattern. One person chooses where to sit, not dramatically, just early. They take the chair with the clearest view of everyone else, the position that requires the least adjustment. From there, they can see reactions before reactions settle. They speak first, but briefly, just enough to frame the tone. A comment that sets direction, a suggestion that narrows options. Others respond inside that frame without realizing it was placed there. When someone drifts from the topic, the controller gently pulls it back. Not sharply, not aggressively, just enough to keep the room aligned with their preferred path. They rarely raise their voice. They do not need to. Their control is quiet. Subtle corrections, small interruptions disguised as clarifications. Questions that guide rather than explore. You notice how often they summarize. They restate what others have said, slightly adjusted. The meaning shifts just enough to serve a different angle. No one argues. The correction sounds reasonable. When tension appears, they step in quickly. They define what the problem is. They define what it is not. They shape the interpretation before others fully form their own. People begin to glance toward them before speaking. A quick check, a small pause. Approval is not demanded, but it is anticipated. If someone challenges a point, the controller does not confront directly. They reframe, they redirect, they introduce a new detail that dissolves the resistance. Everything remains smooth. From the outside, it looks like competence. The room stays structured, decisions move forward. There is no visible chaos. But something else is happening. Others speak slightly less freely. They shorten their thoughts. They adjust their wording. They wait for cues before finishing a sentence. The controller remains composed, hands still, posture steady, eyes attentive but calculating. Nothing feels forced, yet by the end of the interaction, the direction of the room is clear. The outcome aligns closely with one person's quiet preferences, and no one can point to the exact moment it was decided. Control here is not loud. It does not demand obedience. It shapes the environment so that resistance feels unnecessary. The room feels efficient and gently contained. This is where Jung would stop looking at the table and begin looking underneath it. Not at strategy, not at structure, at what drives the need to stay above others. The controller does not wake up thinking about domination. They think about stability, about avoiding chaos, about preventing mistakes. Control feels responsible. It feels protective. But Jung would ask what happens inside when control slips. For the controller, unpredictability feels personal. When someone interrupts the plan, it does not register as a simple change. It feels like exposure, like something fragile has been touched. The need for the upper hand often begins as a defense. If they define the direction, they cannot be surprised. If they set the frame, they cannot be cornered. If they speak first, they cannot be misunderstood. Underneath the calm tone and organized behavior is tension. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet tension that says, "Do not lose position." Jung would call this the shadow of vulnerability. The controller rarely shows doubt, rarely admits confusion, rarely says they do not know. These experiences do not disappear. They move inward. They collect in the shadow. Every time they redirect a conversation, a part of them avoids uncertainty. Every time they correct someone gently, a part of them avoids feeling small. Every time they take the final word, a part of them avoids being overruled. From the outside, this looks like confidence. Inside, it often feels like vigilance. The shadow holds the fear of being dismissed, the memory of being ignored, the discomfort of not being taken seriously. These experiences are rarely spoken about. They are managed through structure. Jung would not accuse the controller of cruelty. He would notice protection. Control becomes a shield. If others depend on their direction, they remain necessary. If others seek their approval, they remain secure. The upper hand is not just about power. It is about preventing the feeling of falling behind. Over time, the controller may lose touch with the original fear. They only know that releasing control feels dangerous. Allowing someone else to lead feels like risk. The shadow grows each time vulnerability is replaced by correction. And the more they organize the room, the more they must organize themselves. Jung would observe quietly, the need to stay above often hides the fear of being beneath. Control is not only about others, it is also about protecting the parts of the self that once felt powerless. And those parts remain, even when no one else can see them. This is where Nietzsche would stop focusing on behavior and begin examining the meaning attached to it. The controller does not experience their need for the upper hand as hunger for dominance. They experience it as correctness. They see themselves as the one who maintains order, the one who ensures standards are upheld, the one who prevents collapse. Control feels aligned with responsibility. It feels justified. Nietzsche would pay attention to how easily control transforms into moral position. Over time, the controller begins to believe that stepping back would be a failure of duty. If they loosen their grip, mistakes might multiply. If they allow others to decide, outcomes might weaken. Their presence becomes associated with quality. Their oversight becomes associated with safety. This belief strengthens the need to remain above. The controller measures competence constantly. They evaluate timing, discipline, reliability. They track who can operate independently and who requires correction. These judgments remain mostly internal, but they shape every interaction. From their perspective, they are not suppressing others. They are refining the environment. They are improving the structure. Their involvement feels necessary, not excessive. Nietzsche would question the comfort in that necessity. When identity becomes tied to being the stabilizing force, equality begins to feel destabilizing. If others prove equally capable, the controller's unique position becomes less clear. If someone challenges direction successfully, the image of being indispensable weakens. So control becomes more than habit. It becomes moral architecture. Remaining above feels responsible. Relinquishing authority feels careless. The controller may even interpret resistance as immaturity. They may view independence from others as disorder rather than growth. Superiority does not need to be loud. It can exist quietly inside certainty. Nietzsche would observe that morality can become a shield for preference. The preference here is not simply for efficiency. It is for position, for height, for clarity that only comes from looking down rather than across. When being right becomes central to identity, disagreement begins to feel like erosion. When guidance becomes constant, shared authority begins to feel like threat. Control then moves beyond strategy. It becomes virtue in the controller's mind. It feels earned. It feels necessary. It feels correct. And once control feels correct, surrendering it no longer feels neutral. It feels wrong. That is where Nietzsche would pause. Not to condemn, but to reveal how easily power can disguise itself as responsibility. This is where Machiavelli would stop looking at intention and begin watching outcomes. The controller may speak about structure, responsibility, or standards, but Machiavelli would ask a simpler question. Who benefits from the arrangement? In every room, someone sets the rhythm. Someone defines what matters. Someone decides when a discussion ends. The controller often occupies that position without announcing it. They do not need to dominate loudly. Their power works through timing. They choose when to respond. They choose when to stay silent. Silence, used carefully, can make others uneasy. It invites adjustment. People fill gaps. They clarify themselves. They correct their own statements before being corrected. The controller understands this rhythm. When a decision approaches, they summarize, they narrow options, they present 2 paths instead of 5. The room feels guided, not restricted. Others often feel relieved that clarity has appeared. Machiavelli would observe how control becomes embedded in structure. The controller volunteers to coordinate, to review, to finalize. These roles appear practical, necessary. Over time, they become habitual. Soon, nothing moves without passing through them. They do not block others directly. Instead, they position themselves as the final checkpoint, the filter, the stabilizer. This makes resistance costly. To challenge them is to challenge the process itself. Power here does not look aggressive. It looks efficient. When someone pushes back strongly, the controller rarely confronts openly. They may shift alliances quietly. They may grant small concessions to preserve larger authority. They may wait for a moment when the challenger makes a visible mistake. Machiavelli would recognize patience as a weapon. The controller studies weaknesses the way others study opportunities. Who needs validation? Who fears exclusion? Who avoids conflict? These observations are not always cruel, but they are useful. In time, the room adapts. People anticipate the controller's preferences. They adjust before being corrected. They seek approval before acting independently. The upper hand becomes normal. The controller may not even experience this as power. It feels like management, like stewardship, like keeping things aligned. But Machiavelli would not look at feelings. He would look at leverage. Who can end a conversation? Who can redefine a mistake? Who can shape a narrative after something goes wrong? When influence flows consistently through one person, even gently, that is power. The controller does not always raise their voice. They do not need to. They have already shaped the board. Until the next observation.